Okay, it's 6:30, so I guess we can call the meeting to order. I'm Chris Olney, the chair. I'd like to do a roll call to get started here. I know that Sarah Mellish and Ann Harrison and Gar Morse will not be here. So Michael Pratt,
Here.
Susan Philbrick,
Here.
Sandy Bodmer Turner,
Here.
Richard Smith,
Here.
Denny Hall.
Here.
Okay,
The truly faithful, we're here in August.
that's right. We're separating the wheat from the chaff here.
Yeah.
So the first item on the agenda is acknowledgement of receipt of correspondence. I know we've gotten several emails from Lorraine. I also received a email from Mary Foley with some comments on the frequently asked questions, which we can go over shortly. And I guess we did get another correspondence this afternoon from the state telling us that they're adjusting the guidelines again, making things a little more lenient, which is good.
Yes, it's great. The mixed use stuff is great.
And we can talk about that later. Gail, any other communications we should be aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So let's get down to the meeting schedule and the work plan, and I'm going to let Betsy give us a little presentation on how we're going.
Testing, can you guys hear me?
Yes, hi, John. We'll get to you later, okay?
Hello?
Can you hear us, John?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Oh, who knows? So Betsy, you want to go over the work plan a little bit? And I can put something up on the screen if that would be helpful.
Okay, so I had sent out a schedule, which,
This is John, I'm sure. It is. Hi, John, we can hear you, you can't hear us? Probably something on your computer, maybe? I don't know. Maybe you should try logging in again.
Make sure his audio's up.
Okay.
so work
Sorry about
plan, I had given everybody, I think, the schedule of upcoming meetings, and Chris and Gail and Tiffany Marletta, who is going to work on communications, and I met today, and we're gonna be putting this portions of the schedule for at least a month of meetings up on the website, so it reminds everybody when we're meeting. I am in the process of developing a scope of services for a consultant to work under a grant that we secured to work on there's a program that the state wants us to use to analyze MBTA zoning for each community. And I don't have the training or computer capacity to be dealing with GIS. So it's a combination of GIS and a database. So anyhow, we applied for a grant, and we will probably use that grant to get a consultant on board. I've identified about 4 or 5 consultants that are on the state approved list, which means it doesn't have to go through a request for proposals. And I've also identified a couple of other consultants, planning consultants, who might be able to work on this as well. And since the scope of services would be under $50,000, basically we can we can send out the scope of services to, say, a half a dozen people, and whoever is the low bidder and also the most qualified we would select. So I think part of our discussion tonight is to appoint a subcommittee to interview 3 or 4 potential consultants.
We can get to that part later in the
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah.
So the other thing we want to do is community outreach, which will be a subject of a meeting, and maybe the next meeting, where we can talk about how.
So Tiffany is working up a plan for community outreach, and that may be in the form of meetings, people gathering together for coffee, or it may be a series of what are called charrettes, where we have work days where Saturday morning, in the fall, we end up having a couple of work days to try to figure out with plans and graphics and stuff how that would all play out, and locations of potential sites. So, and also in the meantime, Gail is working with the town manager and the finance director on determining what grants we have gotten over the past 10 years and what we potentially could get in the next 10 to 15 years in terms of grant revenues. The state's revised guidelines that were sent out this afternoon basically said that if the town was applying for certain grants, and there was a whole list of grants, that they would consider whether the town got the grant or not, based on a number of different factors, including whether they complied with the law, with the MBTA zoning law. So I haven't fully digested all the changes that they've proposed. I did send it out to everybody, but that was probably at 4 o'clock today.
When you say finance director, you mean Andrea?
Pardon?
Andrea Manville, is that what
Yeah.
you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did she say when roughly she's gonna get that?
She is working with Greg and Gail on that, to try to figure out which grants. So initially, they talked about it being MassWorks grants, Housing Choice grants, and then Housing Authority grants. And now they've kind of expanded it a bit.
Right.
Based
Well,
on the
I guess
new-
there's historical and then there's projected theoretical, and I'd be most interested in historical, which I would think would be roughly easier to, put together.
Right. But I know, for example, in this new list, we ended up getting urban agenda grant that was $51,000, and we ended up getting another grant, an MDI grant for 25 or 30,000.
Sorry, in a new what?
Pardon?
In a new what?
So this new list that was sent out
Yeah.
at 4 o'clock today or whenever, there's a list of additional grants that may be jeopardized.
Sure, but that's a projected go forward, right?
Yeah,
In other words, I'm more interested in looking at the 10 years historical,
okay,
and that's black and white hard data, right?
I was
Right.
the opposite, I think.
Yeah, we have to look at what's ahead. I mean, if you never wanna dredge the harbor again, I
Right,
suppose you
I'm
could say.
not saying I don't wanna look at both, I'm just
Yeah.
saying I
Yeah.
wanna look more at the historical, and I'm also saying I would think the historical is just easier to compile, right? Cause it's
Oh,
just,
sure,
Yeah.
cause it's
absolutely,
just,
because it's no numbers.
yeah, it's just,
Yeah.
Plus it's real.
right,
yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
So, but for example, we just submitted applications for a MassWorks grant that I think was $5 or $6 million. So that was submitted. I'm assuming if we don't comply, that could be jeopardized. So,
Well, I think in a future meeting, probably pretty soon, I think Greg Fetterspiel's gonna come and give us a presentation of what he thinks grants have been and.
Right.
with
Again,
the-
I'm interested on both, just like some other people are. I'm just saying, I would just think it'd be easier, quicker to compile the historical and just
Sure.
throw that over the fence while we're waiting on the
Yeah.
projected go-forward stuff, that's all.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, they're actually, I mean, you're bringing up a good point, the two of you, about it's historical, it's the future, but there's also this intermediate, what we've currently applied for. So that's not historical and it's not exactly the future either, it's something quite specific.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd throw that still in projected because it hasn't happened, but, yeah, take your point.
Okay, anything else on the work plan?
I think that's it for now.
Any comments from the task force?
Can I just ask a question about exactly what it is that the consultants we're about to hire are going to do, and how does it fit in with the task that is in front of us?
Okay, we're gonna get to that towards the end of the meeting.
Okay, good.
As part of the administrative things that were on the agenda, so.
Because I was
You can be
sitting here
patient.
thinking you might be.
Okay, I'd like to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is,
May I say one thing?
sure.
I would be happy to help Betsy with the community outreach piece, because I want to be sure we bring people along with us.
Great, that's wonderful. I'd like to move now to the frequently asked questions document. I hope you've all gotten copies of it. And I wonder if anyone has any comments, and I can go over some points that Mary Foley made in her email to me as well. But I'll start with the board, with the task force.
I have a whole long list of questions and clarifications, if that's all right.
Sure.
So, and I've got it organized by the number of the FAQ. I mean, this does look to me like, to some degree, it's a response to Lorraine's crib sheet, because it lays out in such a great summary way what the situation is. So in the second FAQ, there was some material from Betsy that was also very helpful. But there it says it's 37 acres, here it says it's 39 acres. Which
Yeah.
is it, guys?
Well, we're not quite sure.
I was corrected by legal counsel that it was 37 acres and 14.8 acres was to be within the half-mile radius.
So that's the,
So where I got the 39 acres from was the compliance model that we're supposed to be using to say how big it is, and the compliance model, you go to Manchester and it pops up, it's supposed to be 39 acres.
oh geez. So there's a band.
Yeah, we're somewhere between 37 and 39, but we'll get
Okay.
that resolved.
Okay. Okay. I'm assuming on number 3, just a clarification question. Minimum overall density of 15 units per acre. It means average when you say overall. So, you know, the pieces that are 18 units per acre or 92 units per acre, you know, those units get folded into the whole calculation.
They get folded in if they're allowed by right.
Aha, I see, okay, thank you. Yep, all right. And then on number 5 and number 18, there's there seems to be a boundary to what the town can require of a project if it's by right. So there is a requirement to meet certain design standards, and, you know, so site plan review, and so presumably historic preservation may be review. But it says it can't be so onerous as to make the project financially infeasible. What does who determines what's financially infeasible?
So we're just gonna be completely hypothetical here, I guess.
Yeah,
If we require, as part of our standards, that gold bathtubs be provided to all
right,
all units, that would be financially infeasible.
uh-huh.
And I guess it's a fine line, we're just gonna have to draft the bylaw and
See what,
council will take a look at it and see whether passes the test.
Okay, so there's no bright lines
No,
about
it's no
that.
bright
Yeah.
line.
Okay.
Also related to that is most communities that have adopted MBTA zoning have adopted design guidelines
Yep.
on how they want certain buildings to look like. So that's something that goes with the site plan review process. So that's, I think, an important element, in that it would be guidelines that the applicant would need to follow so that the buildings would not be jarringly out of line with what's in town.
Okay. But if then the developer says, well, you know, that's really, I can't use those materials, I have to use something, you know, it's not financially feasible for me to do that, do we have, what's the basis of our case?
Well, I think there'd be some horse trading to some degree.
Yeah, and if we require gold bathtubs in every town, I mean, every unit in Manchester, we could say that's our standard.
I get the gold bathtub as being facetious, but what's a more just realistic, like, give me an example.
you-
So
Say
for example,
We
if-
require 3 parking spaces per unit, that might be financially infeasible.
So, if I understand it, we come up, once the zoning regulations have been determined and it's gonna apply to a particular area, on a lot-by-lot basis, they would analyze how many units could be built under those constraints.
Yes,
And that would have to average to 15,
that's right.
and they would count those units based upon some criteria which we will not know about in advance until they tell us what it is, because we might have a parking restriction that they don't like, we might have a setback that they don't like, we might have any number of things, or we might have in town environmental issues that they don't like, we might require drainage that they don't like. We won't know that until after we've come up with our plan and they tell us.
So there is this model, and you put in all this data, how many parking spaces are required, how many, you know, what are the wetlands restrictions? And so then the model basically says, yes, you're in compliance, or no, you're not.
Because that model has all the lot data and all the sizes,
Exactly.
et cetera.
Yes, at least theoretically, I mean, we have,
There's no way it's gonna take into account things like setback and so forth.
I think it probably will require taking setbacks and things like that.
Some basic stuff.
But that's why we have to hire this consultant, so they can run the model and we can figure it out.
Is that the actual language? Financially infeasible, I mean, that's, to your point, but it's pretty vague, it's pretty subjective, right?
I don't think it's, I mean, in terms of site plan review, that has been in the past, kind of the standard language. I'm not sure for this particular project or for MBTA zoning that language is exact, but I can give you an example of, say, one of the sites that is selected is on the other side of 128. And say the site plan review decision requires they provide a sidewalk all the way up to the development. And it's a mile, say, just a theoretical. That might be something that doesn't work and might be too onerous.
We can track the exact language in the bylaws, that would, or in the guidelines.
Yeah.
Who determines ultimately the yay or nay on the financial impact? Is that the state?
Yeah, we submit it to the state, they review it, and they say yes or no.
And is there some way to negotiate that?
Well, no one's tried it
We'll
yet,
find
so we
out,
don't
right?
know.
We're all in uncharted waters here, okay.
But we
There
should-
is no definition, by the way, in the guidelines of financial feasibility or anything.
There's not.
There's not a definition in the list of definitions. I don't know, I just quickly looked. I don't know if there's something deeper into the guidelines.
I mean, it's probably the case that even if you submit it to the state and even if the state approves it, you're still gonna run the chance that some developer says, oh, these rules you came up with, for me, it's financially infeasible, but.
But we would be on good footing, if we've been proceeding in good faith and, you know,
That's
passed our bylaws in good faith and.
And the state approves them.
Right, well, you know, it is uncharted territory, so we'll see.
That seems a very good question, because there is the issue on the first hand of us coming up with the zoning regulations that satisfy but is there actually are they actually going to require us to bow to pressure from developers subsequently that violate those? I don't see any
think so.
indication of that.
No, I don't think so. I think it would have to be settled by a court.
Right.
And my
But
guess
the
is that,
state would be approving this, would be reviewing and approving the sites that we select, that are selected, that are
Sure,
going to town meeting.
sure. We have to come up with a plan that satisfies the requirements that they've placed before us.
Right.
that's
Once we have done that, we can hope that that plan will actually stand and not be subject to
Yes.
yes,
distortion.
exactly. And in fact, that's the case with our zoning bylaw right now.
Sure.
It can be challenged.
Okay, a simpler question, in item number 7 and item number 14, actually. I'm very confused about whether the general district and residential district A, no, I beg your pardon, residential district D, have the limit to multifamily is 2 family or 3. Because in 14, it says, within the general district, a single dwelling may be converted to 3 family by right, as long as the building is not enlarged. But in 7, it says, it's only 2.
So
Which is true, or are they
they're
both?
both true.
Oh geez, okay.
So in the general district and in District D, you can, or D1, I think, you can build a 2-family house by right. In the general district, if you own a dwelling, you can convert that to a 3-family unit by right.
Aha.
But
But
there's
if you were
isn't,
building.
But there are a bunch of,
there's a bunch of
conditions.
provisions that
Yeah, you
the
can't
building
expand
has
the
to have been
house.
built before 1984.
No,
There's one provision that says,
I don't
but
think so.
the problem with the provision for conversion of an existing house to 3 units is you have to provide 5 parking spaces.
Oh, currently.
Yes. it's-
Yeah, so if you think of our general district, you know, along the water side of Bridge Street,
Yep.
and kind of through the center of town, it's really hard to provide 5 parking spaces.
Well, it's actually misleading to say that you have the right to build a 2 or 3 family in the general district, because that is only subject to the parking requirement, which was clearly put in place by people who formed the original zoning with the understanding that it was going to significantly reduce the extent to which 2 and 3 family properties could be built in that area. So from the time that zoning law was put in place, there was clearly an intention that this was not going to be converted.
Well, there's another problem too, which is almost every property in the general district is non-conforming. And therefore would require a special permit to do anything to it anyway, so.
Yeah, that's.
So if you wanna know how
Oh,
many
that's interesting.
units you could actually do in the downtown by right, not very many.
Require a special permit to alter the structure, but what
Yes.
if you just converted it internally? Then it's just a building permit.
Well, if it's, well, that's a good question, I don't know, I'm not the.
If I wanted to convert my house in the general district to a 3, my understanding was that as long as I get a building permit and I'm not changing any of the exterior features.
I think that's true, but you still had to provide 5 parking spaces.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. So I only bring this up because I've heard it said a number of times that you have the right to build a 2 or 3 family or convert to a 3 family in the general district. It's not really correct, because the restrictions on that are so severe that if you walk through the general district, you'll realize that most of those houses cannot be.
well, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll make that clear in the answer to that question.
I think it kind of goes to the other point that I think we need to be careful of in our communication, and that is the frequently repeated point that we do not have to build these houses, we only have to zone for it.
Yep.
That's a very important point, but it should not, I think, and I hope we all agree, it should not obscure the fact that we're creating zoning laws or proposing zoning laws that are the target for the development of our community. So we're not gonna create laws and hope that nobody does it. We're gonna come up with a zoning understanding that truly is the best plan that we can come up with for future development. And whether we have to develop them now or not, we have to accept the fact that they may well be built.
Well, okay, yeah, but there's a mirror to that, which is the law says we have to allow 555 units in our district.
Yes.
But in fact, there is no way 555 units would be built because there already are 500 listed here
Right,
already.
so the question is, what do we do with what exists?
That'll have a lot to do with exactly what
Yeah,
we're
that's,
playing a game here. I mean, this is a very complicated game, it seems to me.
yeah, it is, yeah.
Mhm.
Do we get to count the existing units as part of that
If we allow them by right, yes.
by right?
Yeah, right now, none
See,
of them,
part of
none
the
of them are allowed by
problem-
right right
You'd
now.
have to take away the parking requirement, for
The tricky
example.
thing is that if you look at a parcel of land that has 18 units, you'd have to zone a minimum 5-acre area, including that property, at the same density or under the same rules that would allow that 18-unit building to get built.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you look at where these places are, for example, and then you try to draw a 5-acre circle and imagine that you would extend zoning by right to have the same density, it's really hard for me to see
Well,
how you could ever do that.
One thing we might be able to try, and it's tricky, maybe it's possible, is to say that if there is an existing 18-unit property, it can stay. It's gonna be allowed by right.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes,
So we
Yes.
back our way into the.
You're good at this game.
because
Well, because there'll be more people to talk to about this.
that, yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, on 9 and 15, what I'm trying to figure out is what's allowed, and how, and I don't remember whether it was 9 and 15. There's mention of 400 residences in the general district, but it's unclear how many units those residences represent. Does anybody know the answer to that?
That's one of the things we have to
Dig.
dig and find,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
We have assessors data, but it's hard to suss out what, there are so many different kinds of units that are described.
Oh, brother.
And we're also having a little bit of issue with how accessory dwelling units are being tracked. So we're working on that issue right now.
Okay,
Um,
that's a hard issue.
Yeah.
You've gotten a lot done, though. I mean, this is such a valuable document. Okay. Let me ask you a question in terms of, just so I understand a little bit better. So if you look over where the Cape Ann Savings Bank is, for example, and the barber shop and the travel agency, that is a mixed use, which is now, we can actually require, it seems, from the new things today.
Yeah.
And up above, I believe, are apartments.
Right.
And so how does that get counted? Does it get counted as a residence? Does it get counted as
So that
just
gets
units?
counted on the assessor's database. It's classified as a mixed-use building.
Yep.
And it has first floor retail and upper floor residential.
And does the assessor tell you how many residences, how many units are in the upstairs?
She specifies units. You have to figure out which are commercial and which are
Oh, see,
residential.
oh, no wonder you've got a headache. Okay,
So, but you've got somebody like Gar Morris who owns the building that is Zach's.
yeah, old
Yeah.
Zach's, the old Zach.
So that building has 7 units and 6 of them are residential. And it's on a 6,000 square foot lot, and he has 1 parking space for everybody. And I don't know if he has any parking spaces for Zach, but that seems to work. But he never would have been able to build it with present zoning, so.
And if he tries to change it, then he's into present zoning and
Right.
all those
Right.
troubles.
Exactly.
Okay, all right, let's see.
Can I ask this, if we're still on 9?
Yep.
I mean, I understand the sentence, it's important to note that, you know, since there are many existing residential units, this does not mean that we need to expect the construction of 505 new units, this is a number to be allowed, not that, but, like, why shouldn't I expect that many, like, I mean,
Because there aren't that many buildable lots in town. We're within a half mile of the train station. A lot of the lots are already occupied with residential units.
but can't they go from 1 to 2, or
They
2 to
could.
3, or change commercial to residential, or,
We're hoping they're not gonna change commercial to residential.
but can they?
Can they today?
No, not today, I mean,
Well, if we don't allow it, then they won't. I mean, that's one of the things we have to grapple with.
I think, to your point, there's nothing to prevent a developer to come in and level, if you can get enough acreage, a site, develop a site by knocking down existing housing and build 3-story garden apartments.
No, we can't do that under our current zoning. The most you can build is a two-family house.
But if we comply with this
Oh.
zoning bylaw,
Then that's right.
we're talking about the difference between today versus under this.
that's
Yeah.
my
So
concern.
today, the answer is no, but under this, let's say potentially yes.
Or potentially no,
Yes,
depending on
unless-
how we write the zoning.
Unless we say that we're not gonna allow commercial spaces
Yeah.
to be torn down as part of this project.
So we would have to affirmatively state that.
Absolutely,
If you
That's why
don't affirmatively state it, then
exactly, and that's, I think, a very important part of this whole
Yes.
puzzle.
Yeah, and very good what they did today, which was to allow the zoning to require that mixed use stays put. That, so you can actually make a requirement in the zoning regs that say you've gotta have mixed use, you can't get rid of commercial real estate.
I thought it was just, maybe I misread it, I thought it was just allowing for more flexibility. I didn't think it was like,
No, the reg is, I mean, the summary that they passed out that I read seemed pretty
They
clear.
came to their senses because originally they specifically told us
You
that
couldn't do
you
it.
could not require,
Right,
in one of these qualified
Right.
districts, you could not require commercial
Pure
mixed use.
yeah.
Now they've changed that, which
right,
should
so
give us the
now,
opportunity to be able to both increase housing density and retain a requirement for commercial use.
okay. I thought it was
Yes.
just, they were just allowing or permitting mixed use.
They're allowing us to require commercial, I think is the
To
word.
require it, so the town can
They're
require it,
allowing us to require, okay.
yeah.
And still count,
Yeah.
and we can still count the residential units above, the potential residential units.
So somebody cited an example, not that this is gonna happen, but Crosby's. So Crosby's would look pretty weird if that converted to first floor residential. But conversely, somebody said, well, why don't we just put 2 floors on top of Crosby's that are residential, units? And would anybody object? I don't know. But there are all these studies that have been done, and in fact, when I was the land planner in Winchester, we did a study of Winchester's downtown, which is a really challenging downtown because you've got floodplain, you've got historic district, and you've got a rail line going through the town, and the downtown zoning was a mess for years, and we finally worked out language so that you could have first floor retail, second floor office, upper floor residential, and in the past, what was driving you've got a rail line right there. What was driving the zoning was the parking. And so we basically kind of didn't eliminate it, but we certainly said, no, you don't need 2 parking spaces for every first floor business. And now there's new development going on that hasn't been going on for 30 years. So, it's
But
a
the high-
dance,
The high
it's a
level takeaway
balance.
to your point is this gets in the language that we're gonna try to put in this, and so there's bookends. On the one end, we can say nothing, which would mean a developer could come in, take a
Yeah.
commercial, boom.
Yep,
To this end, where we could say, if it's commercial today,
It's
It's
commercial.
gonna
gotta
stay
stay
commercial.
commercial, and then okay.
Yep, I think it's a point Richard raised at the last meeting. They actually mentioned it in the third point of the summary, which is that people were afraid of allowing multifamily housing as of right in downtown mixed-use areas would risk a loss of existing businesses and buildings.
Yeah.
And they are moving to stop that, to not have that happen, so, okay. And then I just have one general question, and it kind of builds on the idea you put out, Chris, which is looking at 13, 14, and 15. It seems like the problem is that non-conforming uses, really nothing's allowed as of right. You have to always go get a special permit. But the zoning arose at a time when automobiles were beginning, and it makes everything kind of the same. And part of the charm of the downtown and the quote character that people have expressed wanting to preserve has to do with the irregularity and the variety of it.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering, and I don't know, I don't have the categories of mind at the moment to think about how you would do this legally, but once, let's say you have a non-conforming lot, let's take Gar's place. So it's not conforming, let's say it was let's go back to, let's say it was a single family or two family residence. If it meets all other criteria, whatever it has, so it has one parking, it has, all of that remains the same. Nothing changes, that's allowed. So basically, what is the standard for what remains for that lot? And so you can't go smashing things down as you're suggesting, Danny, because it would have to be, the envelope. I don't know precisely how you would do it in terms of design standards, but what remains the same, and that's the standard. Whatever lot lines, number of units, number of parking spaces, whatever it is.
so I think as a blanket statement, there's a little bit of a problem, because there are some buildings like Cargo, which aren't really historic and aren't adding anything to the downtown, and they don't have to be preserved. So I think what we have to do is distinguish, and this may require doing a survey, to determine what are the historically significant buildings that we want to protect.
Uh-huh.
And we have we have two historic districts. They're sort of toothless at the moment, I think. I don't know if there's any real regulations about them.
It all depends on what the town chooses to do, because there is a little baby tooth in the historic district provision. It requires that the town go to court in order to enforce the provisions. So in terms of demolition and so forth, there is an alteration. There are some people, and I have no idea whether it's true or not, but in the presentation we received from the whatever the alphabet name of our state agency is now, we were told that historic districts would be respected in this process. I have no idea what that means. And as you say, I don't know anyone
I think what
would
it
get
may
too
be-
upset about
Maybe
Carmen's
means what we
historic
say.
nature.
Yeah, maybe what it means is that we should strengthen our historic district and put some teeth into it.
It's a tiny area.
Well, let's make it bigger, maybe, I don't know,
Well, I would certainly go along with that, but it's an issue, and I think that's part of this incredible puzzle, because you can look at parcel by parcel and come up with a completely different idea of what you'd want that parcel to be like, but we're zoning on 5 acre minimum lots.
yeah. Okay, so can I go over Mary Foley's points that you'd like to make?
Can I ask one more?
Sure.
Who put together this FAQ?
So I started it, other people have contributed to it. I had Greg Federspiel write some of these.
Okay, well, I guess I don't know who to pose this question to, but it deals with number 10. You know, does the town have the necessary infrastructure to support these units? And the short answer is, you know, provisional, yes.
Yeah.
Water, sewer, fine. But we say school enrollment is declining, which is true, right? That's factual. But it seems to imply that, you know, more development, more people, more families, more kids, more students, that like you can take that on without an increased cost, which is not the case. Because even as we've seen the school enrollment go down, the cost per student is actually significantly increased, so.
Huh.
So that's just, I don't know who put that in
We
there.
never wanna be in a position where we have to merge again because our population is too low of students.
Sure, fair enough, but it's just, you know, it's a bit of a kill the messenger, but it's just math, you know? Adding more students is just gonna add costs.
Sure,
But
but we're
it
also
might
gonna
be
get
better.
tax revenues as well.
Right,
Pros and cons.
but, okay, but that's a great point, but the cost per student is over $20,000. So now you gotta show me property taxes per unit, that's 20,000, which, you know, that's a significant piece of real estate.
But the
Yeah, I wouldn't
cost-
count on increased tax revenues for going from a one-family to a three-family. I've looked at assessments and it doesn't look to me like a three-family changes much in its tax valuation than when it was a one-family if it's the same building.
Particularly if you're not changing the square footage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So also, when you make these alterations to a large area, which changes the size of the units and the size of the housing that's gonna take place, it's gonna change in some complicated way the nature of the population and the percentage of those families that have kids in school, which I would have no way of knowing.
Well, I think this is a good question for Greg to answer, because I really can't answer it. I can't, this actually ties into what Mary Foley's point was, the same, is that water and sewer and so forth, what happens if we run out of capacity? And what the state guidelines say is that if you run out of capacity, you're not required to approve these units. So even though you've zoned for them, if there is a limit as to how much sewer capacity you have, you can lower the density as a result.
So this is a technical follow-on to that, but who or what determines the capacity, you know? I mean, is that a state DEP then?
It's a combination of, of Chuck Dam here and the state DEP tell us how much capacity we have. I think at the moment we have capacity for a lot, but that's just based on what I've heard from them.
See, it's funny, I've heard that as well, but then I know when I went to connect my house, they didn't want it, so I'm confused.
I don't know. can't
I don't,
answer.
I don't know. either.
So at some point, all the parties involved in terms of infrastructure will come in and, you know, talk with the school about that.
Okay, the second point Mary makes is that saying that there's a large number of existing residential units in the downtown, and to say that we don't have to significantly change the actual density of the downtown. She thinks that's false, because I guess the question is what's significant? You know, how many more units are we going to actually see as a result of this? And I think it's pure conjecture.
Mhm.
And I can tone down the language, I guess, and say, make it clear that we don't know, but it's certainly not gonna be the full build-out that is gonna be required that we approve.
Well, the problem is that we don't really know how many units there are currently.
We don't even know that, that's
Yeah.
right.
I mean, we don't know what.
We know that there's a large number of them.
Yeah, but we don't know precisely.
Let's see, the next one is, something we already talked about is, how many units can actually be built right now by right? And of course, we don't know the answer to that, but not very many.
Well, let me just, on that point, like, isn't there a difference between what can legally be done by right versus practically, right? In other words, legally, a lot can be done by right, but practically, not a lot because of this parking spot thing.
So legally, you'd have to have a conforming lot, which is 6,000 square feet, which is the average size of a lot in the downtown roughly. So there are a lot of lots that are way too small, you can't do anything with them.
Right, but you see what I'm, right, so
Yeah.
legally, yes, practically,
Practically.
not really, because of the conforming and the parking lot there.
That's right.
Like legally, I'd go try out for the MBA, practically, I'm not gonna make the team, right?
Aw.
That may be a minor point, but I don't think it's even right to say it's, legally you can't. I mean, the parking is part of the zoning regulation.
It's part of our law,
It's,
right.
it's not
So
like
that's not
legally you can
correct.
build a 3, but practically you can't. It's legally you can't.
Because you need those
It's
parking
legally-
spaces.
If it's non-conforming,
Yep.
you can't do it.
Right,
And if there's no space there to build,
right, but that's not my problem if there's not the space and it's not conforming. Legally, I still gave you the right. I can't control the fact that,
well, I'm sure.
I
they're not
can't
gonna-
control the fact that the geography doesn't match with what you want. Right? That's what I'm saying, there's a difference between legally and practically.
I see, but I'm sure that the state is going to be very, very attentive to the fact that it cannot be converted into
Sure,
three.
I understand it's different with this going forward, but clearly it is legal because we have had it on the books, right? Like, so,
I guess it's how you interpret it, it's a matter of the wording. To me, if the law says that you have to have 3 spaces and there's no room for 3 spaces, then you
no, I
can't.
get from a practical standpoint, it's a bit cheeky. I'm just saying, it is black and white
Yeah,
legal, that's all I'm saying.
the other thing I'd like to point out on all of this is that we keep talking about the downtown of the general district. It's a big circle.
It's a big circle.
Oh, yeah, it's 500.
But we don't have to zone the entire circle.
No, but we also don't have to do all the zoning in the downtown or in the general district or in any other particular area. And I know it may make sense, I'm open-minded about all of this, I hope we all are, but I think I want to just keep that open to the fact that this is a big circle.
Yeah, you know how, it's 502 acres, that's how many acres it is.
I-
Even if you take out a quarter for the harbor, you still got 375, which is a lot.
So that's a great point, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this question, but just at a high level, what percent of the total circle does the downtown represent? Like, is it 10%, 20, 30?
So
Generally, the general district is about 50 acres.
That's right.
Now, that's more than the downtown,
Yeah.
but the general district represents about 50 acres, and D1 and D2 together about another 46. The E district is 140.
Yeah, most of the land within a half mile is in the E district, which is 2 acres only.
I'm just trying to get a high level of what percent of the
Yeah,
total
so
is
it's
downtown.
about 15% of it.
15%, cool, that works.
So general district, you said was 50 acres, Richard, and what was the other district you said?
The D district,
The residential D1?
yeah, 46.
So to your point, we talk a lot about the downtown, but there's another 85% of the circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last point Mary makes is when the answer to the question 21, the statement that if we don't comply with this, it might lead to higher property taxes. And she says that's just conjecture. And I say, I don't think it's conjecture. I don't know how much taxes will go up, but they're not gonna go down if we refuse to comply.
Like we said at the beginning, there's the historical and there's the go forward, and of course, on the go forward, we can talk about potential mass works for 5-6 million or dredging and all, right? And we can all have our opinions and all this, but historically, you know, I look at our budget, I'm on the thing, you know,
Sure.
it's been a very small percentage.
No, but for example, the housing authorities, this housing subsidy that's provided by the state is at risk here. It's only $25,000. But if they stop paying the subsidy, who's gonna pay it?
The town,
Yeah, so
like 25,000 out of a 40 million budget is.
are our taxes gonna go down as a result?
You've been to our
Well,
town
right,
meetings,
right.
every 25,000.
If we're gonna
Really?
If we're gonna discuss this, we have to have a hard number. It's pointless to talk, of course it's gonna go up. Who cares if it went up $1?
Correct.
The question is,
Correct.
what's the number?
Yeah, we don't, and it's,
Well, and I think you said might lead, you
Might.
didn't say
I didn't say
will,
will.
you say might, and I think that's all right.
okay,
You did, thank you very much for whoever did this. I learned a lot reading it, and it was very helpful.
well, I'm gonna make some changes, and I don't know whether we should put it up on our website as a draft and then maybe confirm it later. I'd like to be able to say this is a task force question and answer, frequently asked question document.
Yeah, maybe a draft subsequent,
And it'll change over time as we
Yes.
learn more.
I definitely, if it's Greg, then it's Greg, but Greg needs to explain to me on that declining enrollment in students and that, because that does not paint the right picture.
Can I ask you, how do you arrive at your cost per student? Do you take the school budget and divide it by the number of students?
I get it from the district.
Right, but how is that calculated?
I don't do their calculations.
So you don't know.
No, presumably the way you
Yeah.
described,
So if you have more students,
it would be
It's-
cheaper per student.
Right, but like I said, as we've gone through this declining enrollment over the past 5-10 years, the number of students has gone down and the total's gone up. So the cost per student increases. So there's not this even rational of, you would think, if you have 200 less students, you actually need a few less teachers, right? Like that's kind of a rational math logic, but for whatever
do
reason.
you? I
Well-
mean, if you're gonna offer the same, menu of classes, no. I mean, all those are things that we've heard in the school.
Right, but even if you keep a constant number of, say you pick 15 students per classroom, which whatever, if you kept that constant, if the total number of students go down, you would need less teachers. I mean, that's,
And what they're taking
And,
and what
and
grades
the opposite
they're
is
in.
true
Yeah.
also. You could take
Yeah.
in 50 more students and not hire any more teachers.
But we're not dealing with the school budget. I think I'm not sure that's the, effect that we would see again.
well, I can just tell you factually, historically, that as school enrollment has gone down, that's a fact, the total budget has gone up and the total cost per student has gone up. That's just the facts. That's not me doing any math. I mean, that's from the district.
But I would be interested to know how they calculate the cost per student.
Total divided by number of students? I mean, that's,
Right, so if you have more students,
Then the cost
then the
per
cost
student is
per
less.
student will go down.
As I
You know what?
understand it, the students from Manchester and the students from Essex, they're different numbers per student.
can you say that again?
That there's different numbers per student from Essex versus Manchester in terms of cost,
No.
no?
This may be along the other thing. I mean, it may not cost any more to add one student. But pretty obviously, if you add 300 students, it's going to cost more to operate.
Correct.
Sure.
That's true.
So I think, and we're talking about 500 units. So I think the point is well taken.
Well, the question is how many more units is that than the units that already are? It kind of depends. It's like this chicken and egg
Well,
problem.
and you're also trying to determine will they send their children to our public
Yes,
school?
yes.
You know, many of our
On and
families
on.
don't.
But I think we could take some reasonable assumptions,
Oh.
and come up with, if you add 585 units, that it's gonna be a material increase in the number of students to the
Yeah,
public school system.
I thought your point, if I understand it, was that it's a bit Pollyannish to say, oh, don't worry about these additional 500 units, they're not going to affect the cost of schools.
That's true.
Right.
That's what that paragraph
Well, I'll
says.
tell you what, how about if I put a statement into that answer that starts off with that statement, that it's clearly gonna have an impact on you add units to the town, it's gonna cost more to operate the town as a result, because there are more students, more water,
More people.
more people, yeah. They'll also be offsetting revenues from real estate taxes, but we don't know yet what that's gonna be. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'm fine with that, I mean, yeah, I can take it to the next level, but yes, I'm fine with just leaving it open-ended, but I'll
Not
steal
that
your
I
word,
would
I don't like it,
allow
I don't like
it.
it where it's Pollyannish, where it's like, yeah, no problem, we can just take them all in because we got declining enrollment. Like, that's,
Well, it
That's
might
just-
be a plus to have more students.
Well, the thing of it is, if there's a way to restate this, the number 10, so it's a little more iffy, I
Yeah.
think there's a great deal of value in the document because it lays out the case and explains things. And I mean, we've already had a letter from Ms. Iavani saying, hey, give me a crib sheet, this is complicated stuff.
Mhm.
And this is a crib sheet, it's at least the start of a crib sheet. So it would be better to get some, even if it says draft, if somebody wants to fuss with this, to the language on 10 to make it a little iffier,
No.
I think it's really important to get it out sooner rather than later,
And
even
I'm,
if it says
and I'm
draft.
fine with 99% of it, I just
Okay.
have that one issue with that one point, that's all.
Okay,
Can you write a sentence that would
Sure,
do the qualification and get it to Chris, and then it can go out?
Yeah,
That would
that's
be
fine.
great. if you
Okay.
could do that.
sure.
great. Okay, let's move on. I'm gonna take the next thing out of order because John Feuerbach is here. And I'd like him to talk a little bit about the Affordable Housing Trust and there's housing initiatives that are happening right now. John, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. My fellow Affordable Housing Trust member right here. My name is John Feuerbach. I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust. I won't get into the history and the background. I think everyone knows who we are, where we come from. And Chris sort of gave me a little sense of what to talk about. And I think it's relative to what we're working on. And I think our main task that we're working on right now is the Manchester Housing Authority sites that have been what we're classifying as the development plan, a partnership of the Housing Authority and the Affordable Housing Trust. We've had a number of community meetings. November of 2021, there was a couple warrants and the town meeting where we got non-binding support for new construction and possibly rehabilitation on the Plains, Loading Place, Newport Park. We've tried to attract a developer through a formal request for proposal process, and it's guided by Massachusetts state law. Disposition of real property, you have to have a request for proposal. We're 0 for 2 on that. We've tried on 2 occasions. The most recent one, it was with the support of a development consultant who we actually paid for, who did a development study and had a proof of concept of what could be possible on that site. Notwithstanding that proof of concept, as part of the RFP, we didn't get any applications. So what we, and that was the end of, sort of like I think it was like, Chris, wasn't like the fall of last year, I think.
Yeah.
Subsequent to that, the Affordable Housing Trust, after talking to some developers, talking to the consultant who helped us do the proof of concept, we embarked on a different course, and that is a request for qualifications. It's a little scaled back in that the applicant doesn't have to look at the sites and propose number of units and put together a budget and put together designs. What we're looking for really is the professional qualifications of an applicant. And we're trying to get at what type of experience do they have working with a public housing authority? What experience do they have working with the state? What was Department of Housing, Housing Community Development, now it's the Housing and Livable Communities, stuff like that. So we have the request for qualifications out right now, and the due date is, I think it's August 28th. I think it's a Monday, I believe. We've advertised it through the State Central Register, although we didn't have to do it formally, but we tried to get the word out as much as possible. We put a notice in the Cricket. A bunch of folks from the Affordable Housing Trust and our development consultant have reached out to developers. Personally, I've talked to, I know we all reached out to SEMA. SEMA has done some outreach. I've talked to 2 development teams. And, so while they're interested, you never really know until the actual due date. I mean, you could have an RFQ, an RFP, you can have 20, 30, 40 people pick it up. You don't know until you actually see what actually comes in. So our hope is that it's not really a heavy lift on the part of the applicant. Really what we're trying to do is get solicitations would then, these development teams would be available to meet with us. And our plan would be, we want to talk through what we have worked on to date and get some feedback with the development team. Is it feasible? What would you improve? What are some of the components that we're looking for that may or may not be feasible from a developer's point of view. We're not making a selection, we would meet with any applicant that meets the submission requirements. Subsequent to that, we would meet as a group, if Manchester Housing Authority and us, and we'd take in everything we've heard and modify if needed what, the concept that we're trying to put out. And we'd reissue a request for proposal. At that point, we'd be pursuing a specific developer who would have the rights to pursue the development. And we would expect them to engage with the housing authority, with us, with town boards, perhaps convene meetings in the town as design and development and finance is advanced. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is get a developer, we get to that point where they have a feasible plan. And then we would be working with our Department of Housing, livable communities. So that's our main, I think that's our main initiative right now. I'm not saying I'm personally frustrated, but it's been people who are in the know, you've heard me talk about this, you've heard Chris talk about this for like 2 or 3 years now. And it seems like we're swinging and missing. And I think it's, developers say the sites are difficult. People are wary about the town climate, the environment for promoting development. And I do my best to say that the Affordable Housing Trust is supportive of the town. The SEMA group has been fantastic in its support of this proposed plan. We've had non-binding support from the town. It is at a very early stage, and there would be significant work and significant time to move along a plan, but we have the ground support for it. So we won't know until we hear back. We hope that we have something back, and that would be a start of an additional form of engagement where we could have some back and forth about what we think is appropriate, and hopefully we can get feedback from someone.
So Newport Park is about half a mile from the train station.
It's within the circle.
It's in the circle, right at the edge of the circle. The Plains isn't, but neither is Loading Place, obviously.
Now, would they qualify if things go forward as in that secondary area that the state is?
If we could create a zone outside the half mile, yes, we could. Otherwise, we'd have to go through a friendly 40B process to get approved.
How big is the Plains lot?
It's like 5 acres.
Yeah, I don't know. My notes are at home. I don't know
It's got
offhand.
some marsh.
When we had our consultant look at it, the thing that was most reasonable is if you go right in and you go straight back, there's some work that could be done. I think maybe some demolition there, and there was some concept of a 2 or 3 story. Again, it's really, really preliminary, but
I was only asking because,
Yeah.
As I understand, we have a minimum zoning parcel size of 5 acres. So if it were 5 acres or more,
It could be a zone.
it could be zoned independently of the surrounding area.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
It's some marshland to the back. And John, what do you think about the affordability, the 10% affordability requirement for the MBTA district?
personally, I would advocate for increasing it a little bit higher. I would suggest,
I don't think you can go past 10%.
You can with a feasibility study that says it's
Yeah.
okay, up to 20%.
20.
And I would think if there was any place where it might be feasible, it might be here.
that's what I would, speaking on my own and not having a chance to talk it at one of our meetings and having community input, but I would say personally 20%, yeah.
Do you think the trust would support a feasibility study to see if 20% was feasible?
I could say that we could definitely discuss it. I mean,
It's good enough for now.
and it's something we have a meeting coming up. It could be one of those unanticipated items that came up. And
Any other questions from task force members?
yeah, I mean, the only other, so that's our main task right now. I think folks might be aware that we've been the beneficiaries of 100,000 and 200,000 from the CP community preservation. I think we're about 1.3 million right now. I think I'm pretty close. I think we're about 1.3 million.
Yeah, we can almost buy a house.
You know, so we're in a better we're in a better position now than when we were, you know, 2017, 2018, when we were approved and go out and do business. Well, you can't be a player on a municipal level unless you have some subsidy money. You know, so I think we're in a better position. I think 1.3 just sort of gets us in the door. And I say it meaning that if we have it known on the website, we would solicit an offer for our funds. Could be a private developer, could be anyone who's either doing new construction or wants to convert. We're open and available to meet with someone to use our funds. But we also know that the 1.3 and to grow hopefully every year, it could be a significant resource for any developer who would be interested in the MHA properties. Yeah, Richard?
John, do you have a sense of what densities you could achieve under those lots?
I don't know what the density, I know we have a schematic unit count.
That's what I meant.
Okay,
Yeah, we thought it was 20 units that we could add to Newport Park, for example.
and how many acres are there?
I think there are 5.
Okay,
Part of it's sort of a wetland area, and then there's some,
Still counts.
Yeah.
Still counts.
still counts, that's right, still counts.
so you could add 20 units, and how many units are there currently?
Sandy, why don't I do this? I can, I've got my information at home. I can just type it up, send it to Chris, and then he
And distribute it,
circulate it
that'd
to
be
the group.
great.
All right?
There's actually, the feasibility studies on the Affordable Housing Trust website, so you can read that study.
Well, I can also save you the work. I got notes right home. I just type it right up, and I can send it. And,
You can just
The
email
number-
everybody.
That would be great.
yeah, the number of units and from the proof of concept, what was looked to be reasonable. And I just want to warn Chris and I and other members say it's so preliminary. It was really just it will need work, but it's certainly a starting point.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm going a little off topic, but I want to build on your 1.3, we can buy one house, which is obviously valid, but I mean, most people don't buy houses with 100% cash. So I guess where I'm going is, I gotta believe there's federal, state, or nonprofit entities that, in the same way that if I go to buy a house, I put 20% down, I get the 80% from a mortgage company. Are there entities that can help you, leverage the cash? Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
you
no,
can end
certainly.
up buying 4 or 5 times the
Grant
1.3
money.
because they're not like a for-profit mortgage company, but they're kind of doing the same thing just on a nonprofit or governmental basis.
So that would be a ton of work to try to actually buy a property ourselves and get the financing. We're just a volunteer board. So I think our strategy is to partner with a developer they can do all the work, we'll just give them some of the money.
Yeah, again, I don't know the nonprofit world, I know the for-profit, I'm just saying, usually you can leverage on a 4-to-1,
Yeah,
5-to-1
right,
ratio.
right.
I'm
That's
just
what we wanna
thinking-
do, that's what we wanna do.
Right, but I'm saying,
In fact, the Powder House Lane project borrowed money from, I think it was Citizens Bank.
Mhm.
They didn't over leverage it, but it was like 60%. So
Ah.
it's
Yeah.
certainly possible.
so even
Yeah.
private for-profit, yeah.
For acquisition financing. I mean, Chris, one thing that we have done is we moved our money to Canadian Savings Bank with the hope that if we do need quick financing to it, that they would be a partner with us on it.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to make the point, the 1-3 shouldn't be a limitation of 1-3, it should be,
Oh, no,
in my mind,
5,
2,
6.
3, 4 times.
sure.
Yeah, beyond that, yeah.
Mr. Gates,
Tim Gates, 2 Desmond Avenue. I've got a couple of off-the-wall suggestions. I know in Boston with a super highway, they've been selling airspace for people to build buildings over the highway. Perhaps the MBTA right-of-way, which doesn't really include land on the sides and would have no parking, sell this airspace over the tracks and build maybe 2 levels of low-income rental units, 100%. Place some parking facility up at what may be land of the DPW. Tied in with that, I understand from what I did years ago was proposing, take some kind of state subsidy that the MBTA gets for having the tracks here. Take that money that apparently can be used to provide funding for Capan Transit Authority, and then have them run a shuttle bus service to the parking area if needed, but also set up a parallel system for bus lines really from Gloucester through Manchester, on over to Beverly, and back again. And I think that killed about 3 birds with one stone.
it is a comprehensive project. Well, yeah, something like that might be the way we have to go.
Wonder what the government, what the state would say if we zoned the MBTA tracks.
It's like touche,
We'll have
touche.
we'll have a bid density bonus above the tracks.
Hey,
To
But
make
it's
it
a good
sweeter.
reminder that there are more rights. It's not just the land.
Right, right.
To make it sweeter, ask the MBTA just to give us, as a town, the airspace rights.
Yeah. The tunnel would be like Salem.
I don't know whether.
Underwater.
Salem Tunnel,
Tunnel.
Oh, boy.
Anyone else have any comments on this?
I have a question.
Yes.
Katerina Gates to Desmond School. First of all, comment, I'm so sorry that we didn't buy the Coburn apartments when they came into the market because it didn't go high. We could have afforded when we built so big schools with millions and millions, and for the affordable housing, we were not willing to offer anything. Sad for that.
Mhm.
And a lot of people talk about it. So, when we say affordable, is it for rent or is it for purchase and rent?
It can be either, I know, John, can you explain the?
Well, it could be either, yeah, it could be for home ownership, it could also be for rental, but when we say affordable, we also try to emphasize community affordable housing, because at least personally, and I think folks from the Affordable Housing Trust, we look at our community and we value the diversity, and we want to do as much as we can to help preserve that diversity. But when we talk about that affordable component, it means how much someone is making. And it could be, so when you're doing,
Like we did downtown, across from the
From-
supermarket before.
yeah, right, there's an element of that right across from the dry cleaner. My understanding, and Chris, you wrote he's written articles about it, there's a market component, but then there's an affordable component as well.
Because I remember when that was going on for approval, and they were having meetings to do or not to do, or what to do about it, we suggested, my husband and I, that they should not have it for purchase, just for rental, because if your life gets better and you make a lot more money, you can go and buy a bigger house, or maybe a more expensive house, and get other people who cannot afford that kind of money to rent those houses.
Yeah.
Because of course they did both, but unfortunately also, some houses sold after 3 times the price they had paid. So why, even up to last November, a house there sold an apartment condo, $875,000. And I thought that was pretty high for an affordable housing downtown.
So that was not an affordable unit. The affordable housing unit that are owned, the prices are set by a formula. You can't sell them on the open market.
There's two
It's
components.
a deed writer.
The sales price or the rent has to be at a level that meets the income of the buyer or the renter. So, yeah,
But
so
we
someone has to
definitely-
be, someone has to be
we
income
definitely-
eligible.
yeah, we definitely need rental units
Yes.
more, because people who have apartments, they charge a lot of money, they don't care, and there is no control for rent, so they can do it. So I think more people should be able to come and live by rent, and have the privileges that others have who can afford that.
This is all interesting information, but I'm trying to connect it all back.
Mhm.
Does this have to do with our ability to put in this language a certain percent?
Yes. Yeah, do we want to require developers who come in to build this housing to set aside 10 or 20% of the units for affordable
Okay.
tenants?
So just like with the commercial discussion, there's bookends, 0, 10, 20, is that the bookends?
Yeah, 0, 10, 20, that's right.
As written now, there's no requirement for affordable housing.
As written now.
Our zoning we don't require,
The MBTA zoning bylaw that they're proposing, that the state is basically foisting on us.
So even if we did copy paste with the state language right now, it doesn't have an affordable in it.
There's no affordable requirement. There's an encouragement. They would like to see 10% at least, and 20, I guess, subject to, but as it's written, there is no requirement.
Got it.
But the problem with that is that the state also wants each community to have 10% affordable units. So if you don't put a restriction, then you're falling behind.
I agree. I mean, it's counterintuitive.
yeah,
It's a difficult problem, but there are competing objectives here, because the substantial portion of this development is within a half-mile circle, which means that you're now tying your plan for affordable housing to a completely different set of requirements, and I think you have to take that into account.
So mathematically, even a town that was right now at 10%, which I know we're not, but even a town that's right now at 10%, if they didn't put the 10% thing in their MBTA,
they could,
then you go behind.
yeah, they could.
Mathematics.
Then you're subject to a 40B.
Because any of the new
Right.
units adds to your, whatever, denominator but not the numerator. Yeah.
Exactly.
Once again, we don't really even know where we're going to be 2 years from now. We may have more units than we expected.
Any other points to be made? Okay, John, thank you very much. Appreciate your coming in. And I guess now we'll go to Betsy and our base case.
So at the last meeting, there was a lot of discussion about what is Manchester's baseline in terms of where we stand in terms of zoning and number of units and where can we develop? And so what I did was I kind of tried to back into it a little bit, in that the state has requirements for excluded property. So say, for example, you take the area that's a half a mile radius from the train station. By taking the excluded land that the zoning requires, so wetlands, floodplain, municipal buildings, federal buildings, historical societies, there was a whole list of excluded lands, so you exclude those. Then you take a look at what units require special permit. So anything in a floodplain requires a special permit, anything in a water supply district. If you have a pre-existing non-conforming building that you wanna do something with, that requires a special permit. If you wanna put 3 units in the general district, but you don't have the parking, that requires a special permit or a variance. So, basically tried to, at some point, I will try to map this out, but, that's your baseline for the half-mile radius. And similarly, outside the half-mile radius, you have a huge amount of land that is in the water supply district. You have the flood control district. You have anything on the other side of 128 in the LCD requires a special permit and site plan review. So again, process of elimination, you take all those districts and then you figure out what's left. And then you also have to take into account again the excluded area that the MBTA zoning guidelines adds. So I think at some point we will, I'll do some mapping and see if I can come up with some reasonable maps of what's excluded, what requires special permit, and then see what's left.
That would be fabulous.
And actually,
This is a great start.
the state actually did reduce, every community is supposed to have 50 acres to be zoned, and they reduced it for us because of the harbor, I think mostly, to 37 acres. So they already
Yeah.
understand that we're constrained here.
Well, they understand the harbor issue, but we do have so many more. I'm hopeful that at some point, when we have a much more accurate picture of our land and what is left, that there will be some appetite to advocate further for more of a reduction for us, because we are unique topographically.
It's either ledge or wetlands.
Right,
You know?
that's it.
And I've asked this repeatedly of the state. So things like floodplain and wetlands are excluded per the guidelines. But what about filled tidelands? And there's a picture on the front of Jeffries Creek, the Historical Society book, and it's taken from Spy Rock Hill, and you look down and all you see is wetlands. All you see is harbor, and all of that Reed Park, Masconomo Park, the train station was, or the whole train area where 40 Beach Street is, that's all filled tidelands. So I have asked the question of the state, I made a formal request of them, is filled tidelands excluded? They haven't gotten back to me yet, but.
And of course, Back Bay in Boston is all filled tidelands.
Right.
Doesn't it come down to what when we say floodplain, are we talking about the FEMA designated
Yeah.
floodplain?
Yeah.
So that's, it seemed to me to be the land that's excluded. The fact that it used to be marsh 100 years ago, doesn't matter. It isn't now.
But that needs a special permit from the planning board in order for them to go forward with a chapter 91 license,
But it requires a special permit
because it's formerly filled tidelands. So for example, I'll give
is that
you,
a zoning determination?
that's a zoning
So,
determination.
but that's what we're doing, is altering the zoning.
Right,
So
Right.
anything that requires a special permit now because of the zoning regulation is not an obstacle to us, it's merely something that
something
we
that
would,
think
would
about
be
changing.
required to be changed.
So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that I've looked at the FEMA floodplain and it leaves most of that area unscathed. I mean, there is some area down there around Tappan Street and,
Right, where it used to go through underneath
Yeah.
Beach Street.
yeah.
Yeah. And it went all the way up to that warehouse building at C Street.
Yes.
Yeah. And then
yes.
you have
It goes a long way.
a wetland further up along the rail line that drains down into that Tappan Street area. So
Yeah,
you
it
got a
takes-
lot of wetland.
It takes a big chunk out of that triangle behind the tracks.
So if we're at, what is it, 39 acres?
37, I think.
37? So if 37 acres produces a circle this big, right? But then you start looking in the circle and like you said, the state goes, well, you can't build here because of X, Y, Z, and you can't build here because of whatever, right? Does that mean effectively the circle gets bigger? Because you gotta meet that 37 acres?
No, the circle is 500 acres.
So-
37 acres is what we've gotta find in that circle to zone in a way. Correct me if I'm
Yes,
wrong.
that's
So the circle is the half-mile radius. And within that half-mile radius, the town is required to do roughly 15 acres, zone 15 acres for by right 15 units an acre. And then the remaining
Could be someplace else.
25,
Okay.
20,
But end of the day,
Is outside.
somehow, some way, you gotta find 37 acres.
That's right.
right,
That's how,
Right now.
I'll forget about circles. Somehow,
Yeah, yeah.
some way, you gotta
It could be a
hit,
very weird shaped thing,
you
whatever.
gotta hit 37 acres.
You can do weird shaped things as long as they're each 5 acres.
Yes.
Yes.
yeah, as long as they're contiguous,
Yeah.
5 acres.
So they can be little blobs all over town if we wanted. Well, within reason. Anything else on this?
Thank you,
Okay.
it was very helpful.
All right, so the next thing on the agenda is approval of meeting minutes of June 26th and July 20th. July 20th was a computer session where Ann Harrison showed us how to use the mapping system. Anyone have any changes to the minutes?
No, not me.
Make a motion to get them approved.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Gail, those are good to go. And now I'm gonna open this up for any public comment, anything that people have heard tonight that they want to say anything about.
Oh, I have something.
Yes,
Catherine Gates again, students in school. There is a place, I keep saying that to everybody I come here to, on Tappan Street, that it was suggested by one of the boards, or maybe others discussed it, and something from the town who live nearby opposed. My husband grew up on C Street, so he knows everything about that area, and there is not much traffic, still not much traffic.
Yeah.
And that place that has the Valentine's
Yeah.
business, such a good place for affordable housing.
it would be a good place for
And also
affordable.
beautify the area there too. You know,
Yeah, it
it's
would.
Close to everything, so if anything like that could be done, it would be great.
Yeah, that's something that should be considered, absolutely. I don't know whether we tried to zone that as part of the MBTA thing.
And everything is, field land there anyway, but all these houses don't seem to have any problem with planning so far.
That's, thank you, that's a great idea. Any other comments, anything on, get their hands raised?
Question. Carlos
Yes.
of 1 Massanutten Street. Is there, is it possible to get a copy of some of the handouts that you guys have been referencing? I know it's online, but I just.
You mean a
have
hard
paper
copy?
copies?
Hard copies?
Yes.
I guess we could make them available at town hall, like,
Okay.
So we're going to try to make packets available on the website. And we had a website meeting this morning with the goal of Thursday mornings, the packet would be put on the website. So this group is gonna start meeting twice a month, starting in September. So we're trying to organize and put as much factual information as we can on the website.
So in the interim, is there any, would it be possible to get copies town hall or?
Yeah,
look, Gail, maybe Gail can make copies and have them sitting somewhere,
yeah.
clerk's office or
Well,
something.
It'll be on the website, literally. We make copies and people never pick it up. And I hate to say that, but we have lots of, everything will be online and you can print it off the website.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else, anyone on Zoom, hands up?
Sarah Pierce has her hand up.
Okay,
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Sarah Pierce, 9 Front Street. I just wanted to know, what is the $5 to $6 million mass grant works, for?
It's a infrastructure improvement to get water and sewer under 128 to the other side of 128.
For what purpose?
For the purpose of providing to increase development in that area, whether it's an existing development or newly proposed.
for cell
Oh,
signaling.
okay.
So cell signaling would use it, potentially the medical building that's on sewer and that's on septic and well might use it. So anybody over in that region might hook into water and sewer.
Okay. And then I guess I just had another question. From what I understand and the way it's been proposed, the whole basis of the MBTA project was to put housing that was within a walking or, close to the MBTA to make it easier to get to a job or whatnot. But how is that happening if we're putting small parcels of developments throughout town?
So of the 37 acres that we have to provide, 18 of them roughly half has to be within a half mile. So
Okay.
that's,
And I'm still a bit confused on the existing structures, because if this is a housing crisis we're trying to solve, if we have existing occupied multifamilies, how is that creating housing?
was it correct? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, we would be changing our zoning so that much of the existing multifamily housing would comply with zoning. As much of it doesn't right now.
Okay, but if we're trying to, the MBTA program is to create housing because there's a housing crisis. So I'm still not sure, out of the 550 units or the 15 units per acre within that half-mile radius, I know it's a little confusing, but what part would be new construction and what would you be how can you count houses that are already occupied? How is that creating housing?
So we're not under an obligation to create housing. We're under an obligation to allow housing. And that's an important distinction.
We don't even know yet what exact increase there will be in the number of units buildable under zoning after changes are made to conform to MBTA
Yes,
requirements.
that's right.
Because it will almost certainly be more units than are there now, but we don't know that.
We don't know that.
I think Sarah's asking a pretty interesting question though, but I think it may not be in this town with its age and current configuration, and correct me if you think I'm off base here, please, but it's, for example, I think it may be about preserving the multifamily housing that exists. For example, if you look at Powder House Lane with its 29 units, if that hadn't been saved for affordable housing, it might have gotten smacked down and there would be 2 big single-family homes there and you would have lost 27 units. So I think there's a preservation, in this particular town, I think there's a preservation effect. Although again, you know, what Chris is saying is right, it's getting the zoning right, it's not encouraging some particular thing to actually happen.
Sandy, I don't think it preserves anything because it just creates rules that allow people to build by right if they choose to, but anything that's already here is already here. And in fact, you could have say I have 20 units on a small non-conforming lot.
Yep.
We could change the zoning to allow a density that would put 10 units by right on that lot, and a developer might come in and say, great, now I can tear down that old thing and put in 10 units and make a pile of money because I can now do this by right. So it's not a preservation issue, it is a means of forcing us to a zone in a way that will allow by right construction.
Well, if the zoning says what you can do now to a unit as something that, let's just think it through together for a minute, says in the case, let's say, of Powder House, and that's in a zone where you can only do 1 acre zoning, so you wind up with 2 houses where you had 29 if you smack those down.
Well, I understand, but the
Yeah.
29 are already there. They
Right.
could actually be endangered by increasing the density versus vice versa. It's very
I don't-
complicated. You know, you have to think about why do people not tear down 3 families and build them in the town now? Why don't we see something like Fremont in Seattle where all of our big houses disappear and 3 unit buildings get built? Well, no, it's easy. You tear down the structure, it's easy to put in parking.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened here. Obviously the economic pressures didn't push it, but it doesn't preserve anything.
Yeah, well, okay.
So I would just have one more, maybe 1 or 2 more things to say. So just a comment, not a question, but I think it's really important when writing the zoning and looking at our town, preservation is key, and also weighing out the facts of taking grant money, but yet potentially changing a town that is a small coastal town, you know, irreversibly for grant money that I'm not sure how much that actually is going to add up to, like someone had mentioned earlier. So I think just looking at the whole picture is, and as I think Chris stated in his mission statement, I read in the paper that, you know, there is an option to opt out. There are consequences, but there are also huge consequences with moving forward with the MBTA project. It's not a one size fits all, and I think it was designed poorly, honestly, because that scale just doesn't really apply to our town. And then just to follow up, I know Mr. Gates had asked or mentioned something about airspace, and I read an article, I couldn't hear the answer, so sorry about that, but I did read an article that developers were going to Beverly prior to their zoning change, prior to the retool Street condos being built, and Cabot Street. Have developers already approached the town and are asking to hold airspace?
I'm not aware of any.
So I do want to address one of the concerns, which is that the town is going to be changed dramatically as a result of this. And I think our mission is to make sure that doesn't happen. And I don't think it's an either-or proposition. It's not, one or the other. There's going to have to be a solution here which protects the quality of the town that we all want to save, and also provides housing opportunities for people who need it. And it's a balance, and it's probably not gonna be perfect, but I don't think we
That's
can.
good to hear.
Pardon?
I said that's good to hear.
Oh, well, I think that's our mission. That's
Yeah,
what
yeah.
we're trying to do.
So
Okay,
this-
thank you so much.
This is not a new issue of change and development. One of the reasons I'm here is that my father was the chairman of the planning board here 50 years ago.
Oh, is that true?
And there was a development proposed, a subdivision proposed off of Pine Street. And people went nuts. And abutters were very concerned, and the planning board looked at it and said, they've abided by the letter of the law, and we pretty much have to allow this subdivision even though people are not thrilled with it. And now you just drive by it and you don't think about it. So,
So, and to state this a different way, 12 Summer Street, across from the dry cleaners, everyone seems to be very happy with that kind of development. No one seems to complain about it. It looks nice. It's serving a bunch of people. That is double the density of what the state is requiring.
so Sarah has another question.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, just had to unmute. Thank you. Yeah, so I just, earlier in the conversation, and I don't want to drag on about this, but I think what's in the town now, the town has changed over the years, but when you talk about potentially, or, it was mentioned tonight, putting 2 stories of residential living above Crosby's, whether that's just an example, but that's the kind of building that I think would be a huge mistake. And I think a lot of people would have a lot of opposition to that. That's just my take on that. But I also wonder, have you thought about your height limitations on the downtown area?
Sure, we can certainly apply reasonable height restrictions. There currently is a 35-foot height restriction in the town. It doesn't have to change. We can achieve a density of 15 units of an acre and maintain a 35-foot height restriction.
When I was a kid, the building that Barrett Real Estate is in had another story on it.
Sure, yeah, that's right.
There were a bunch of other locations in the center of town.
And there are buildings in the downtown that are much higher than 35 feet. No one seems to care about those either. It's part of the charm.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Chris, over there.
yes.
I just wanted to follow up, this has been really a wonderful meeting, so thank you very much. But when you had mentioned about, the housing that we kind of desperately need here in the town, I'm really hoping, especially what John was saying about the affordable component, because the builders really, for the most part, if they do go forth with building, if they find this space to do it, it's not gonna be affordable, and it's going to be it's gonna be very expensive. So it's not really for the teachers and the firemen and the seniors and things of that nature. Let's all be real, right? If they're gonna build, they're gonna build very expensive.
Yep.
And so I think the affordable component that John was mentioning, and you putting the 10 or 20% is huge, because that's exactly what we need in this community. That's what we need. So I'm hoping that the numbers are super, super low of these expensive multifamily units that come in, because I think the affordable component is what we really need to strive for, and 80% AMI is not really affordable. And I
That's
think,
right, that's right.
and I think that we need to be mindful of that. We don't need $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 multifamily units here in the town, which will probably end up happening. We need more affordable units and senior housing units, and I really hope somebody here is on top of that with regards to, 10 units equals another affordable unit, and you know that. And so that's just my passion. I just wanna make sure that affordable units is what's we're really looking at, and that we're not gonna build 300 units of $10,000 apartments, that's all.
Good, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay,
Rosemary Costello has her hand up.
Hi, Rosemary Costello, 12 Bennett Street. I'm just curious, given that the timeline is sort of aggressive, when talking about design guidelines or some kind of design guidance for developers, is that something that you have to submit with the zoning, or is that something that's going to come subsequent to the zoning? When would that be developed?
that is a very good question. It'd be great to have it as part of the zoning, but it could be just regulations that the planning board or somebody develops subsequent to the zoning coming into place.
I wonder how lenient they're going to be on allowing these afterthought restrictions, because it goes right against the grain of the whole MBTA.
I think as long as the restrictions are not outlandish, I guess whatever that means.
I see.
I think that'll be
I mean,
fine.
I think they should be developed in tandem with the zoning.
Well, they should be, it's just a question whether we can do it.
Well, if they're claiming that they want the onerous guidelines to be eliminated, they can't necessarily approve your zoning without that creation. So in order to know what might be onerous or not, you have to tell them what it is
Sure,
that you're gonna
so,
require.
well, if we use the same design guidelines that, say, Marblehead uses or something similar, how could they say that's unreasonable?
Yeah, no, I agree. I was just curious whether that was the plan to incorporate them in this short timeline.
Yeah.
So the planning board just updated, and legal counsel's reviewing it right now. They created rules and regs and they updated site plan review and the site plan review process. So that process is in pretty good shape. And, I think that probably what makes sense at some point in the not so near future is that we have a subcommittee that perhaps looks at design guidelines.
I'd be nervous about design guidelines coming in after we get agreement from the state on the zoning. I just,
Yeah.
you're dealing with you're dealing with a bureaucracy that's got to interpret and understand these rules, and there's no guarantee that you'd be allowed to do.
So Richard, I have an idea. Let's create a subcommittee to come up with the design guidelines, and you could be the chair of that.
Well,
Yeah.
those who speak up deserve. No, it's a
I
big,
just
it's a
also
big
wanted to
project.
say thank you to everybody, because I know this is a lot and it is an aggressive timeline, and it does matter to the community what happens, and I really appreciate everyone who's involved in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any others?
No.
Okay,
Sorry.
so the next meeting is on September 8th.
Ah.
I am not gonna be here, but I hope Gar will be there, lead you on. I think the topic of that meeting is going to be outreach to the community outreach. And maybe Tiffany could come or have a plan that you all could discuss.
I'm sorry, is it, it's September
Eighth.
8th? That's a Friday.
Oh, 7th.
I don't want to delay us too much, but I do not understand where we're going yet. I see this very aggressive timeline. I see this very complicated set of decisions we've got to make. And when I look at the timeline, it looks like someone else is coming up with the proposed zoning. I don't understand, when does that happen? When do we start getting down to looking at parcels and zones and lines?
I think probably by the end of the year, we're gonna be, maybe
or
sooner.
earlier. So, before we forget this,
It looks like November 9th. If you look at Betsy's timeline.
Well, that's what I looked at, and it appeared to me that there was a plan there, but who's producing that plan? Is that us, or is it, it's listed on the timeline as being produced from the outside?
So there'll probably be a consultant on
Yeah.
board by then who's gonna start.
so can we talk about that for a minute?
Sure.
So I have identified, there's a state procurement list, and I have identified a number of consultants on that state procurement list who are presently approved by the state to work on a number of zoning projects, including MBTA zoning. There are also several consultants who are very well thought of in the field, who are also potentially available to do this work, to do some of this work. I do not have experience in the GIS database program that the state is mandating we use. So, in a meeting earlier today, I ended up talking with Greg and Chris about perhaps developing a subcommittee to, I am working on a scope of services that can go out to, say, a half a dozen consultants. And what we need is one or two people on this committee, on the task force, who'd be willing to look at the scope of services. I would also send it to Greg for review. We send it out to half a dozen people, and we give them 3 to 4 weeks to comment on it. So ideally, we would have somebody on board by mid-September-ish. So that entity, that consultant entity, would be working on it with the town planner. And then we'd be bringing more information to you as these meetings progress.
Thank you. I guess what I'm trying to, maybe I'm not asking it very well. I'm trying to figure out exactly what our role is here. At some point, we get down to deciding what parts of town, what is our general strategy, how are we shaping this? And I am confused as to how much of that is coming from an outside consultant or planner, and how much of that is coming from our work internal, and how do you imagine that's gonna develop?
So I imagine what's gonna happen is, we're gonna set the stage for what the consultant is gonna do. We're gonna say, this is what we're concerned about: historic preservation, we're concerned about filled wetlands, tidelands, we're concerned about FEMA. We want a density that maybe is varied throughout the town and not uniform. We want to, so given all these parameters that we're gonna come up with, Mr. Consultant, tell us what we can do.
Give us a couple
Give
scenarios.
us some alternatives.
So here's the analogy. The town planner and the consultant are the cab drivers. You are our fares. You are the ones that are trying to figure out where we're going. And it's our mission to try to work with you and get you there.
I guess to use that analogy, are we just giving you an end address, or are we saying go straight, go left, go right?
I think a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Aren't you really saying to the consultant, here are our concerns. This is the map. We want you to map out where our options are.
Yes.
We can essentially make some judgments. At the end of the game, we're making the decision.
Right.
Yes.
We don't have the expertise at present to really flesh out what our options are.
Well, and I think I'm getting that picture and I understand that. That kind of a working relationship is only gonna be effective if there's a lot of back and forth.
Sure.
And that back and forth takes a lot of time. I am, just, guess I'm,
You're not gonna do it in one meeting, for sure.
I don't see how we're gonna get it, I mean, we should feel like, there's a fire behind us right now, I think, because
Well,
this is.
so I think the way this is going to, based on prior experiences I've had like this, it's, you start off saying, what the hell are we gonna be, this is just overwhelming. And then suddenly the thing starts focusing, and then in the end, it's just gonna be a straight shot, because we're gonna know exactly what we wanna do. Or
Well,
maybe it's several alternatives, but.
My concern, and maybe I'm just being a reward here, my concern is that the longer we wait till we get to the point that that back and forth begins, the less control we're gonna have over the end product.
Fair enough. That's a very good point.
Well, maybe one thing we can do in the interim is talk about, what we think our priorities are as a committee.
Yes.
So that when the person is on board, we've already hashed out, our priorities. Ideas that have already come up. I mean, there's no reason we can't start wrestling with those types of things.
Yeah, I think there are some basic questions we can start asking already. Do we want one district? Are we just gonna fiddle with the general district, or are we gonna expand it out to other districts?
I completely agree with you. I hope we dive into this very quickly.
Okay, well, we will.
We'll start the agenda for next time.
Okay. So we have the consultant RFP. Who would like to be on that committee that could review these scope of services and help make a selection?
What does it involve?
I'd be happy to work on the scope of work.
Pardon?
I'd be happy to help.
So we have,
Okay.
How about Richard though, too?
Um,
Some of his,
So I'm writing a draft scope of services for the consultant. Then I need somebody to review that. The town administrator has agreed to review it. I would need several people from this committee to review it. And then, once that scope of services, everybody's happy with it, then we would shop it to a half dozen or so potential consultants.
I don't really even know what the scope of services is for yet, but I suppose I would know
So
if I reviewed it.
basically, the scope of services would be for using the state's model program, which is GIS and Excel database, to help this group go through various permutations and combinations and develop mapping, so it will help you hone down what you want.
So this would be the service to determine whether or not a proposal that we come up with actually solves the problem?
yes,
Correct,
yes,
correct.
exactly.
Right.
That's it.
And then the town planner and the consultant potentially could work on draft zoning language and work with your committee on design guidelines.
That's in my wheelhouse. I'll be.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's
So,
right up your alley. I'm serious.
Okay. Do I have anything else here to say? So also, so the next meeting is gonna be talking about community outreach, and I think there should be a subcommittee trying to engage, how to design an engagement program, how are we gonna relate to the town? Workshops, coffees, presentations to clubs, to the Council on Aging. There's a whole raft of things that we're gonna have to be doing simultaneously with designing this thing to get this happening. So, I don't know who'd like to be working on that aspect of it. maybe Sue, since you've just come off a campaign.
So did you.
I mean, I said I would help Betsy earlier, so I don't mind helping with that. I don't know. There's 3 of us, maybe we can.
Yeah,
Is that a yes, Sue?
sure.
Okay, great. Okay,
Maybe we can get one of the people who are not present today to.
Yeah.
go on
Yeah, there we
as
go.
well.
Sign them up.
Dora, get Dora.
That'll teach him not to.
Okay, well, I think that's, the only other thing that I want to say is that there's the idea floating around that we should participate in a program called SharePoint. It's a computer application. The planning board uses it now as a way of sharing documents internally. So that may be happening, in which case you're all gonna get notified, and there might be a little training session on how to use it. But in general, the way to get to the materials for every meeting going forward is you go to where it's our website, and you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen a little thing that says meeting packet. And you click on that, and all the documents that are gonna be discussed at the meeting will pop right up for you.
And then those same documents would be put in a package and scanned and put on the task force website, so they'd be available to the public.
Yeah, that's right. Okay,
Sounds good.
all right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody, thank you.
Thank you.